The heart monitor's steady beeping suddenly turned into a shrill, continuous alarm that cut through the sterile silence of Operating Room 7 at Chicago Memorial Hospital. 12-year-old Marcus Chen lay motionless on the surgical table, his small body dwarfed by the maze of medical equipment surrounding him. What had begun as a routine appendectomy had become every parent's worst nightmare in a matter of seconds. Dr. Patricia Williams, the lead surgeon, stared at the monitors in disbelief as Marcus's blood pressure plummeted and his heart rhythm became erratic. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Her hands, steady through thousands of procedures, trembled slightly as she called out orders to her surgical team. In the observation gallery above, Rebecca Chen pressed her face against the glass, her designer business suit wrinkled from hours of anxious waiting. As the CEO of Chen Industries, she commanded boardrooms worth billions, but in this moment, she was powerless to help her only child. The surgical team worked frantically to stabilize Marcus, but something was going terribly wrong. His body wasn't responding to the medications, and his vital signs continued to deteriorate. Through the intercom, Rebecca could hear fragments of urgent medical conversations that filled her with dread. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, the operating room doors burst open, and a tall figure in scrubs entered with quiet authority. Dr. Daniel Rodriguez moved with the confident stride of someone who had faced impossible situations before, his weathered hands already reaching for surgical gloves as he assessed the crisis unfolding before him. Rebecca Chen had never imagined that her life could change so dramatically in the span of a single morning. She had started the day like any other, reviewing quarterly reports in her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Chen Industries Tower in downtown Chicago. The panoramic view of Lake Michigan stretched before her as she prepared for another day of high-stakes business negotiations and strategic decisions that would affect thousands of employees worldwide. Her personal assistant had already arranged her schedule with military precision, from the board meeting at 9 to the investors' lunch at noon, followed by a press conference announcing their latest acquisition in the renewable energy sector. The call had come at 8:17 in the morning, just as Rebecca was reviewing the final details of a merger that would make Chen Industries one of the largest clean energy companies in North America. Her son Marcus had collapsed during his morning basketball practice at the prestigious Lakewood Academy, doubled over in pain that had sent his coach into a panic. The school nurse had immediately called an ambulance, and by the time Rebecca arrived at Chicago Memorial Hospital, Marcus was already being prepped for emergency surgery to remove what doctors suspected was an inflamed appendix that threatened to rupture. Rebecca Chen was no stranger to pressure. At 38, she had built Chen Industries from a small family import business into a multinational corporation with offices in 12 countries. She had inherited the company from her father, David Chen, when she was just 26, and many industry observers had predicted that the young woman would never be able to manage the complexities of international business. They had been spectacularly wrong. Under her leadership, the company had expanded beyond traditional manufacturing into cutting-edge technology, sustainable energy, and innovative materials science. Her reputation for making tough decisions under pressure was legendary in the business world, and competitors had learned to respect her ability to turn challenging situations into profitable opportunities. But none of that experience had prepared her for the helpless feeling of watching her 12-year-old son being wheeled into surgery. Marcus was everything to Rebecca, the bright center of her carefully ordered world. His father, Robert Chen, had died in a car accident when Marcus was only 3 years old, leaving Rebecca to balance the demands of single motherhood with the relentless pressures of running a global corporation. She had structured her entire life around ensuring that Marcus never felt the absence of his father, attending every school play, every basketball game, every parent-teacher conference despite the demanding schedule that often kept her in meetings. Until late at night. Marcus had inherited his mother's intelligence and determination, but he had also developed a gentle spirit that reminded Rebecca of her late husband. The boy excelled academically while maintaining friendships across all social groups at his exclusive private school. He volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends and had recently started a recycling program at Lakewood Academy that had caught the attention of environmental groups throughout the city. Teachers consistently praised his maturity and leadership qualities, often commenting that he possessed wisdom beyond his 12 years. The Chen family had always been close-knit, but the bond between Rebecca and Marcus had deepened after Robert's death. They had developed their own traditions and inside jokes, from their Saturday morning trips to the farmer's market to their Thursday night cooking experiments where they attempted to recreate dishes from different countries. Marcus had become Rebecca's confidant and advisor, offering perspectives on business decisions that often surprised her with their insight. He had an intuitive understanding of people and situations that reminded her why she had chosen to build a company focused on sustainable practices and ethical business relationships. The morning of the surgery had started like any other school day. Marcus had bounded downstairs for breakfast, already dressed in his basketball uniform and excited about the tournament games scheduled for that afternoon. Rebecca had been reviewing emails on her tablet while preparing his favorite breakfast of whole grain pancakes with fresh berries, a routine they had maintained for years. Marcus had been chattering about a science project on renewable energy sources, proudly explaining how solar panels worked and questioning whether wind turbines might be more efficient in certain geographic locations. His enthusiasm for learning never failed to amaze Rebecca, and she often found herself learning as much from their conversations as she taught him. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The phone call from the school had shattered that peaceful morning routine in an instant. Marcus had been running drills with his teammates when he suddenly stopped mid-sprint and clutched his right side, his face contorting in pain that was clearly far beyond the normal bumps and bruises of athletic activity. The coach, Mr. Thompson, had immediately recognized this was a medical emergency and had called for the school nurse while having another student call 911. By the time the paramedics arrived, Marcus was barely conscious and running a fever that indicated a serious infection was spreading through his body. Rebecca had abandoned her morning meetings without explanation, leaving her bewildered personal assistant to reschedule appointments worth millions of dollars while she raced through Chicago traffic to reach the hospital. The drive had felt endless, every red light an eternity as she imagined the worst possible scenarios. She had tried calling Marcus's pediatrician, Dr. Sarah Hoffman, but learned that the emergency surgery couldn't wait for their family doctor to arrive. The appendix had to be removed immediately, and the best surgical team available would be taking care of her son. Chicago Memorial Hospital was renowned for its pediatric surgery department, and Rebecca had tried to find comfort in the knowledge that Marcus was receiving the best possible care. The lead surgeon, Dr. Patricia Williams, had an excellent reputation and had performed hundreds of appendectomies throughout her career. The procedure was considered routine, with a success rate that should have made it nothing more than an inconvenient interruption to their normal lives. Rebecca had signed the consent forms with confidence, expecting to take Marcus home within a day or two with nothing more than a small scar and strict instructions to avoid basketball practice for a few weeks. The waiting room had been filled with other anxious families, but Rebecca had found herself unable to focus on the magazines or television programs that were meant to provide distraction during the surgery. She had paced the corridors, checked her phone obsessively for updates from the operating room, and tried to maintain the composure that had served her well in countless business crises. Several colleagues had sent messages offering support, but she had been too preoccupied to respond to most of them. Her assistant had quietly managed to postpone the day's meetings without creating any public relations problems, understanding that Rebecca's priority was entirely focused on her son's well-being. The surgery had begun at 10:30 in the morning, with an estimated completion time of noon. Rebecca had positioned herself in the surgical waiting area where she could see the doors leading to the operating rooms, hoping to catch sight of Dr. Williams as soon as the procedure was finished. She had rehearsed the questions she wanted to ask about Marcus's recovery time and any special care he would need during the healing process. The hospital had provided her with a private consultation room where she could make necessary business calls while remaining close to the surgical area, but she had found it impossible to concentrate on anything other than her son's condition. As the morning progressed into early afternoon, Rebecca began to sense that something was wrong. The surgery was taking much longer than originally anticipated, and the occasional glimpses she caught of medical personnel moving between operating rooms seemed more urgent and routine. A nurse had assured her that complications sometimes extended surgical time without necessarily indicating serious problems, but Rebecca's intuition told her that this was different. She had spent years learning to read subtle signs in business, negotiations, and the same instincts that had made her successful in corporate environments were now telling her that her son was in danger. At 2:15 in the afternoon, Dr. Williams emerged from the operating room with an expression that confirmed Rebecca's worst fears. The surgeon's usually confident demeanor had been replaced by barely controlled concern as she approached the consultation room where Rebecca was waiting. The appendix removal had gone according to plan, but Marcus had developed complications that were beyond anything the surgical team had expected. His body had gone into shock during the procedure, and his vital signs were indicating that something much more serious was happening than a simple inflammatory condition. Dr. Williams explained that Marcus appeared to be having an adverse reaction to the anesthesia, but the symptoms were unlike anything she had encountered in her 15-year career. His heart rate and blood pressure were fluctuating wildly, and his body wasn't responding to the standard medications used to counteract anesthetic complications. The surgical team was doing everything possible to stabilize his condition, but they were facing a medical mystery that required expertise beyond what their current team could provide. She recommended immediately consulting with specialists who had experience with rare anesthetic reactions and complex pediatric cases. Rebecca felt the world tilt around her as she processed the information Dr. Williams was providing. The successful businesswoman, who had navigated corporate crises worth hundreds of millions of dollars, found herself struggling to understand medical terminology that would determine her son's fate. She asked questions that revealed her desperation to find some action she could take, some decision she could make that would protect Marcus, the same way she had protected their business from countless threats and challenges. But this was a situation where her wealth, influence, and strategic thinking abilities were completely irrelevant. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical consultations, second opinions, and increasingly complex explanations of Marcus's deteriorating condition. Specialists were called in from other hospitals, but each expert seemed as puzzled as the last by the unusual combination of symptoms Marcus was displaying. His body was rejecting every attempt to stabilize his vital signs, and the medical team was running out of conventional treatment options. Rebecca found herself caught between hope and despair, clinging to each small improvement in Marcus's condition, while trying to prepare herself for outcomes that she couldn't bear to contemplate. As evening approached, the hospital's chief of pediatric surgery, Dr. Margaret Foster, arrived to personally oversee Marcus's case. Dr. Foster had a reputation for handling the most challenging pediatric surgical cases in the Midwest, and her presence brought some measure of comfort to Rebecca's growing anxiety. However, even Dr. Foster seemed concerned by the complexity of Marcus's reaction and the lack of clear treatment protocols for his specific combination of symptoms. She recommended bringing in additional specialists and potentially transferring Marcus to a research hospital where experimental treatments might be available. The suggestion of transferring Marcus to another facility sent a chill through Rebecca's heart. She had read enough medical literature during the long afternoon to understand that transfers were typically recommended when local medical teams had exhausted their treatment options. The thought of her son being moved to an unfamiliar hospital, away from the doctors who had been caring for him all day, felt like an admission that his condition was beyond hope. She struggled to maintain her composure while asking Dr. Foster about the risks and benefits of such a transfer, trying to apply the same analytical thinking that had served her well in business decisions. Dr. Foster explained that Marcus's case had become one of the most unusual she had encountered in her 20-year career. The combination of his reaction to anesthesia, his body's rejection of standard treatments, and the speed with which his condition was deteriorating suggested that they were dealing with a rare medical phenomenon that might require experimental interventions. Research hospitals had access to treatments and equipment that weren't available at community hospitals, even facilities as well respected as Chicago Memorial. However, transferring a patient in Marcus's unstable condition also carried significant risks that had to be weighed against the potential benefits of specialized care. As Rebecca tried to process this impossible decision, she became aware of increased activity in the corridor outside the consultation room. Medical personnel were moving with the urgent efficiency that she had learned to recognize as a sign of emergency situations. Through the partially open door, she could hear fragments of conversations that included medical terminology she didn't understand, but the tone of voice was unmistakably serious. Dr. Foster excused herself to check on Marcus's current status, leaving Rebecca alone with her thoughts and fears. The waiting room had emptied as other families completed their medical visits and returned home to their normal lives. Rebecca found herself envying their routine problems and simple solutions, wishing that Marcus's situation could be resolved with the same straightforward approach that had characterized his previous medical care. She thought about all the times she had worried about minor injuries from basketball games or common childhood illnesses that had seemed significant at the time, but were nothing compared to the life-threatening crisis they now faced. Her phone had been buzzing with messages from colleagues, business partners, and friends who had heard about Marcus's hospitalization through the network of relationships that connected Chicago's business community. Rebecca appreciated their concern, but found herself unable to respond to most of the messages. How could she explain that her son was facing a medical crisis that none of the experts seemed able to understand or treat? How could she ask for support when she didn't even know what kind of help Marcus needed? As the evening progressed, Rebecca realized that she was facing the most important decision of her life, with less information and fewer options than she had ever encountered in her business career. Every corporate crisis had eventually yielded to strategic thinking, careful analysis, and decisive action. But Marcus's medical emergency was governed by biological processes and medical mysteries that couldn't be solved through determination and resources alone. She was discovering the limits of her control in a situation where her son's life hung in the balance. The sound of rapid footsteps in the corridor interrupted her dark thoughts. Dr. Williams appeared in the doorway with an expression that immediately captured Rebecca's full attention. Marcus's condition had taken another turn for the worse, and the medical team was preparing for emergency measures that would require her immediate consent. The standard treatments had failed, and they were now considering experimental interventions that carried their own significant risks. Time was running out, and decisions had to be made quickly if Marcus was going to have any chance of survival. Rebecca followed Dr. Williams back toward the operating room area, her mind racing as she tried to prepare for whatever information she was about to receive. The corridor seemed endless as they walked past other operating rooms where routine procedures were being completed successfully, a stark contrast to the medical emergency that had consumed her entire day. She thought about Marcus's excitement that morning as he prepared for his basketball tournament, and how quickly their normal life had been replaced by a nightmare that seemed to have no clear resolution. The intensive care unit had been prepared to receive Marcus if his condition could be stabilized enough for transfer from the operating room. Rebecca caught glimpses of the sophisticated monitoring equipment and life support systems that might soon be keeping her son alive. Machines that represented the pinnacle of medical technology, but also the severity of his condition. The nurses and technicians preparing the ICU moved with practiced efficiency, their professional calm providing a sharp contrast to the anxiety that was consuming her thoughts. As they approached the operating room area, Rebecca could see increased activity through the windows that looked into the surgical suites. Multiple medical teams were consulting with each other, and the urgency of their movements suggested that Marcus's situation had become even more critical. Dr. Williams paused before entering the consultation area where they would discuss the experimental treatment options, giving Rebecca a moment to prepare herself for decisions that no parent should ever have to make. The weight of responsibility settled on Rebecca's shoulders as she realized that her son's survival might depend on choices she was about to make with incomplete information and desperate hope. All her experience in making high-stakes business decisions seemed irrelevant when facing medical options that carried the possibility of either saving Marcus's life or causing additional harm. She took a deep breath and followed Dr. Williams into the consultation room, ready to face whatever information and options awaited her, determined to find some way to bring her son safely through the crisis that had transformed their lives in the span of a single day. It was at this moment of absolute desperation, when conventional medicine had reached its limits and Rebecca faced the most impossible decision of her life, that fate would intervene in the form of an unexpected ally. In the corridor outside the operating room, a figure approached with quiet confidence, carrying both the weight of personal tragedy and the promise of unconventional solutions that might hold the key to saving Marcus Chen's life. Dr. Daniel Rodriguez had never planned to become a single father working the night shift at Chicago Memorial Hospital. At 42, his life bore little resemblance to the promising future he had once envisioned as a young medical student at Northwestern University. His apartment near the hospital was modest, filled with the organized chaos that comes from raising a 9-year-old daughter while maintaining a demanding career in emergency medicine. Soccer cleats sat next to medical journals, and Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator alongside schedules for his rotating shifts and her after-school activities. The path that had brought Daniel to this point in his life was marked by both extraordinary success and devastating personal loss. He had graduated at the top of his class from medical school, completed a prestigious residency in pediatric surgery at Johns Hopkins, and had been recruited by several major hospitals across the country. His specialty in complex pediatric cases had earned him recognition in medical journals, and his innovative surgical techniques had saved children who other doctors had considered beyond help. For nearly a decade, he had built a reputation as one of the most skilled pediatric surgeons on the East Coast, with parents traveling from across the country to seek his expertise for their children's most challenging medical conditions. Everything had changed 5 years ago when his wife Maria was diagnosed with aggressive ovarian cancer. The diagnosis had come without warning during what should have been a routine medical checkup, and the oncologist's grim prognosis had shattered the comfortable life they had built together. Maria Rodriguez had been a brilliant architect, designing sustainable housing projects that combined environmental responsibility with aesthetic beauty. Her creative spirit and infectious optimism had balanced Daniel's intense focus on medicine, and together they had created a home filled with love, laughter, and dreams for their daughter's future. The 18 months that followed Maria's diagnosis had tested every aspect of Daniel's medical knowledge and emotional strength. He had consulted with the world's leading oncology experts, researched experimental treatments, and used every connection in the medical community to find innovative therapies that might extend his wife's life. Despite access to the most advanced medical care available, Maria's condition had deteriorated rapidly, and Daniel had been forced to watch helplessly as the woman he loved fought a battle that medicine could not help her win. During Maria's illness, 4-year-old Emma had shown remarkable resilience and maturity that both amazed and worried her parents. She had adapted to the changes in their household routine, accepted the presence of medical equipment and caregivers with grace beyond her years, and had found ways to bring joy to her mother during the darkest moments of treatment. Emma's innocent questions about her mother's illness had forced Daniel to find explanations that were both truthful and age-appropriate, a challenge that proved more difficult than any surgical procedure he had ever performed. The end had come on a quiet Tuesday morning in spring, with Emma at preschool and Daniel holding Maria's hand as she slipped peacefully away. The funeral had been attended by hundreds of colleagues, friends, and families whose children Daniel had treated over the years, but he had felt completely alone despite being surrounded by support and sympathy. The grief had been overwhelming, complicated by guilt over his inability to save the person who mattered most to him, and by the daunting prospect of raising Emma without her mother's guidance and love. In the months following Maria's death, Daniel had struggled to maintain his surgical practice while caring for Emma and processing his own grief. The prestigious position at Johns Hopkins, that had once been the center of his professional identity, began to feel like a burden that prevented him from being present for his daughter during the most difficult period of her young life. Emma needed stability, consistency, and a father who could be emotionally available rather than consumed by the demands of complex surgical cases that often required him to travel or work extended hours. The decision to leave Johns Hopkins and relocate to Chicago had been both practical and therapeutic. Chicago Memorial Hospital had offered him a position in their pediatric emergency department that would allow him to use his surgical skills while maintaining more predictable hours and greater flexibility for Emma's needs. The work was less prestigious than his previous position, and the salary was significantly lower, but it provided the work-life balance that had become his priority after losing Maria. Emma had adapted to their new life in Chicago with the same grace she had shown during her mother's illness. She had enrolled in a public elementary school where she quickly made friends and excelled academically, showing particular talent in science and mathematics that reminded Daniel of her mother's analytical mind. Her teachers consistently praised her kindness toward other students and her mature approach to challenges that might overwhelm children her age. Emma had developed a fascination with medicine that went beyond casual interest, often asking detailed questions about Daniel's work and showing genuine concern for his patients' well-being. The apartment they shared near the hospital had become a sanctuary where father and daughter had rebuilt their relationship and created new traditions to replace those they had lost with Maria's death. Thursday evenings were reserved for cooking. Experiments where Emma chose recipes from different countries that they would attempt together, often with hilarious results that filled their home with laughter. Weekend mornings were dedicated to exploring Chicago's museums and parks, adventures that allowed them to discover their new city while strengthening the bond that had sustained them through grief. Daniel's work in the pediatric emergency department had evolved into something more meaningful than his previous surgical career had provided. While he missed the intellectual challenge of complex procedures, he found deep satisfaction in being the doctor who provided immediate care during medical crises that terrified both children and parents. His experience with loss had given him an unusual ability to communicate with families facing uncertainty, and his surgical background allowed him to recognize conditions that might be overlooked by doctors with less specialized training. The night shift that Daniel typically worked provided additional benefits for their single-parent household. Emma's school schedule aligned well with his sleep routine, allowing him to be present for breakfast, homework assistance, and bedtime. Stories despite working unusual hours. The hospital's on-site childcare program accommodated Emma on occasions when his shifts extended beyond normal hours, and several of his colleagues had children Emma's age who had become close friends through. Their parents shared medical careers. Daniel's reputation at Chicago Memorial had grown steadily over the 3 years since his arrival. While his colleagues were initially skeptical about a highly credentialed surgeon choosing to work in emergency medicine, they had quickly recognized his exceptional diagnostic abilities and his skill in handling pediatric cases that other doctors found challenging. Parents often requested him specifically after positive experiences during previous emergencies, and the hospital administration had begun consulting him on complex cases that fell outside the normal scope of emergency medicine. The personal cost of maintaining his demanding career while raising Emma alone had been significant, but Daniel had found ways to manage the challenges through careful planning and the support of other single parents in their neighborhood. Emma's after-school program provided supervision until he could pick her up before his evening shifts, and a network of trusted babysitters ensured that she was never left alone during his overnight work schedule. The sacrifices were substantial, but seeing Emma thrive despite the loss of her mother made every difficult day worthwhile. Emma's interest in medicine had grown increasingly sophisticated as she observed her father's work and listened to his stories about helping children recover from serious injuries and illnesses. She had begun reading children's books about anatomy and physiology, asking questions that demonstrated genuine understanding of medical concepts that impressed even Daniel's most experienced colleagues. Her compassion for others had manifested in volunteer activities at school and in their neighborhood, where she often helped elderly residents with simple tasks and showed remarkable maturity in interacting with people from different backgrounds and circumstances. The financial challenges of single parenthood had required Daniel to make adjustments to the lifestyle he and Maria had enjoyed during their marriage, but he had discovered that simpler pleasures often provided more lasting satisfaction than expensive entertainment or luxury items. Emma had never complained about their modest apartment, or the fact that their vacations consisted of camping trips and visits to free community events rather than elaborate resort destinations. Her appreciation for small gestures and everyday moments had helped Daniel recognize the richness that existed in their uncomplicated life together. Daniel's relationship with Emma had deepened in ways that might not have been possible if Maria had lived and their original family structure had remained intact. The shared experience of loss had created an understanding between father and daughter that transcended typical parent-child dynamics, and their mutual dependence had fostered a partnership based on respect and genuine affection. Emma often served as Daniel's confidant and advisor, offering perspectives on personal and professional decisions that consistently demonstrated wisdom beyond her 9 years. The medical community in Chicago had begun to recognize Daniel's unique combination of surgical expertise and emergency medicine experience as a valuable resource for complex pediatric cases. He had been called in as a consultant on several unusual cases, where his background provided insights that helped other doctors develop successful treatment plans. These consultations had reminded him of the intellectual satisfaction he had found in his previous surgical career, while allowing him to maintain the work schedule that prioritized Emma's needs. Emma's academic performance had consistently placed her among the top students in her grade, with teachers noting her exceptional problem-solving abilities and her talent for helping classmates understand difficult concepts. Her science projects had won several school competitions, and her essays about family and community demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of complex social issues. Daniel took immense pride in Emma's achievements while remaining mindful that her success was the result of her own hard work rather than any particular parenting strategies he had employed. The hospital staff had embraced Emma as an unofficial mascot during the occasions when she accompanied Daniel to work during school holidays or professional development days. Her friendly demeanor and genuine interest in medical procedures had charmed even the most serious doctors and nurses, and several departments had created special activities to engage her curiosity about healthcare careers. Emma's presence had actually improved morale among the pediatric staff, who appreciated her enthusiastic questions and her ability to connect with young patients who were frightened or anxious about medical procedures. Daniel's personal life had remained focused entirely on Emma and his work, with little time or energy for romantic relationships or extensive social activities. He had occasionally accepted invitations to hospital social events or neighborhood gatherings, but his primary commitment remained to providing Emma with stability and emotional security during the crucial years of her childhood development. The depth of his love for Maria and the intensity of his grief had made the prospect of new relationships seem both impossible and unnecessary, when Emma's needs provided such clear direction for his priorities. The specialized medical knowledge Daniel had developed during his years at Johns Hopkins had not disappeared despite his transition to emergency medicine, and he continued to stay current with developments in pediatric surgery through medical journals and professional conferences. This ongoing education had proven valuable in several emergency situations, where his advanced training had made the difference between successful treatment and potential tragedy. The combination of his surgical background and emergency medicine experience had created a unique skill set that was increasingly recognized by colleagues throughout the Chicago medical community. Emma's emotional intelligence had developed remarkably since Maria's death, and she had shown an unusual ability to sense when other people were experiencing difficulty or distress. Her teachers had noted her tendency to befriend students who were struggling socially or academically, and her natural inclination toward helping others had made her popular among both peers and adults. Daniel often marveled at Emma's capacity for empathy, recognizing traits that reminded him of both Maria's compassionate nature and the healing instincts that had drawn him to medicine. The evening routines that Daniel and Emma had established provided structure and comfort that had helped both of them navigate the challenges of single-parent family life. Emma's homework time was sacred, with Daniel available to provide assistance while respecting her independence and problem-solving abilities. Their shared dinner conversations ranged from Emma's school experiences to Daniel's interesting cases, discussions that had helped Emma develop sophisticated thinking skills and a mature understanding of the world beyond their immediate environment. Daniel's approach to parenting had been influenced by his medical training in ways that proved beneficial for Emma's development. His ability to remain calm during crises had provided Emma with security during difficult moments, and his analytical thinking had helped him recognize and address her emotional needs with the same systematic approach he applied to medical diagnoses. The patience required for complex surgical procedures had translated into tolerance for the normal challenges of childhood, allowing Emma to make mistakes and learn from experience without excessive criticism or intervention. The community surrounding Chicago Memorial Hospital had provided Daniel and Emma with the extended family of colleagues, neighbors, and friends who had supported them through the transition to their new life. Emma had developed close relationships with several of Daniel's colleagues' children, creating a network of friendships that enriched her social development and provided additional supervision when Daniel's work schedule required flexibility. These relationships had given Emma exposure to diverse perspectives and experiences that broadened her understanding of different family structures and cultural backgrounds. As Daniel walked through the corridors of Chicago Memorial Hospital on the evening when Marcus Chun's surgery was taking a dangerous turn, he carried with him the weight of his own experiences with loss and the deep understanding of how quickly medical emergencies could transform families forever. His specialized knowledge, combined with his personal experience of fighting for someone he loved, would soon converge in a moment that would test every aspect of his medical training and emotional strength. The intersection of his professional Expertise and personal understanding of grief was about to become the foundation for decisions that would change not only his own life, but the lives of a desperate mother and her critically ill son. The moment Daniel Rodriguez stepped into Operating Room 7, he could sense the tension that had settled over the surgical team. Like a heavy fog, Dr. Patricia Williams looked up from the monitors with relief evident in her eyes, though she tried to maintain professional composure as she quickly briefed him on Marcus Chin's deteriorating condition. The 12-year-old boy lay surrounded by machines that painted a grim picture through their digital displays, his small form appearing even more fragile against the stark white surgical table. Daniel's trained eyes immediately absorbed the critical information displayed on the monitors while his hands moved with practiced efficiency to examine Marcus's charts and review the medications that had already been administered. The boy's vital signs were erratic in ways that defied conventional medical explanation, and the combination of symptoms suggested something far more complex than a standard reaction to anesthesia. His blood pressure was fluctuating wildly between dangerous extremes, his heart rhythm was irregular despite multiple attempts at stabilization, and his body temperature had begun dropping to levels that indicated potential organ failure. The surgical team stepped back slightly as Daniel approached the table, their respect for his expertise evident in the way they waited for his assessment before continuing their efforts. Daniel had encountered similar cases during his years at Johns Hopkins, rare instances where pediatric patients developed complications that challenged even the most experienced medical professionals. The key to successful treatment in these situations often lay not in following standard protocols, but in recognizing patterns that suggested unconventional approaches might be necessary. As Daniel examined Marcus more closely, he began to notice subtle signs that the other doctors had missed in their focus on the more obvious symptoms. The boy's skin tone had a particular pallor that Daniel had seen before in cases involving genetic predispositions to anesthetic complications, and the pattern of his breathing suggested that his body was struggling with more than just the effects of surgical medications. These observations, combined with the unusual combination of symptoms, began to form a picture that pointed toward a rare condition that required immediate and aggressive intervention. Dr. Williams provided additional details about the surgeries, progression, and the various treatments they had attempted, her voice carrying the frustration of an experienced surgeon who had run out of conventional options. The appendectomy itself had been completed successfully, but Marcus's body had begun failing during the closing procedures in ways that suggested underlying factors beyond their initial diagnosis. Multiple specialists had been consulted, but none had encountered a case quite like Marcus's, and time was running out for finding effective treatment. Daniel's mind raced through the differential diagnoses he had studied during his specialized training, searching for conditions that might explain Marcus's unique combination of symptoms. His experience with rare pediatric cases had taught him to look beyond the obvious explanations and consider possibilities that other doctors might overlook due to their statistical improbability. The pattern of Marcus's vital signs, combined with his age and the specific medications he had received, began to suggest a diagnosis that would require immediate confirmation through specialized testing. The urgency of the situation demanded quick decision-making, but Daniel forced himself to take a moment to consider all possibilities before committing to a course of treatment that could either save Marcus's life or cause additional complications. His surgical training had taught him the importance of thorough analysis, even in emergency situations, and his experience with loss had shown him the devastating consequences that could result from hasty medical decisions. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders as he realized that Marcus's survival might depend on his ability to recognize and treat a condition that few doctors would ever encounter. Rebecca Chun watched from the observation gallery as this new doctor examined her son with an intensity that was both reassuring and terrifying. She could see the concentration on Daniel's face as he reviewed Marcus's charts and consulted with The surgical team, his movements suggesting both urgency and careful consideration. The fact that he had been called in at this critical moment indicated that Marcus's condition was even more serious than she had realized, but his calm demeanor provided some measure of hope that a solution might still be possible. Daniel's examination of Marcus revealed additional symptoms that supported his growing suspicion about the underlying cause of the boy's condition. The specific pattern of muscle rigidity, combined with the cardiovascular instability and temperature fluctuations, pointed toward a rare genetic condition called malignant hyperthermia that could be triggered by certain anesthetic agents. This condition was potentially fatal if not recognized and treated quickly, but it was also one of the few medical emergencies where immediate intervention could completely reverse the dangerous symptoms. The diagnosis of malignant hyperthermia explained why Marcus had not responded to conventional treatments and why his condition had continued to deteriorate despite the medical team's best efforts. The condition was caused by a genetic mutation that affected how certain individuals process specific anesthetic medications, creating a cascading series of physiological reactions that could lead to organ failure and death within hours if left untreated. However, the condition was also one of the most treatable medical emergencies in medicine, provided it was recognized quickly and addressed with the appropriate medications. Daniel immediately began issuing orders to the surgical team, his voice carrying the authority of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. The treatment for malignant hyperthermia required a specific medication called dantrolene that was not routinely stocked in most operating rooms, and obtaining it quickly would require coordination with the hospital's pharmacy and possibly other medical facilities. Every minute of delay could worsen Marcus's condition, making the rapid implementation of treatment protocols absolutely critical. The nursing staff responded to Daniel's orders with the efficiency that characterized emergency medical care, but obtaining the necessary medications and equipment would take time that Marcus might not have. Daniel made the decision to begin cooling Marcus's body temperature immediately while they waited for the dantrolene to arrive, using techniques he had learned during his specialized training that could help stabilize the boy's condition until definitive treatment was available. The combination of immediate interventions and specific medications offered the best chance for complete recovery, but success would depend on how quickly they could implement the full treatment protocol. Dr. Williams coordinated with the hospital's pharmacy to expedite the delivery of dantrolene while Daniel worked to stabilize Marcus's vital signs through a combination of cooling measures and cardiovascular support. The boy's condition was still critical, but the implementation of appropriate treatments was already beginning to show positive effects on his heart rhythm and blood pressure. The key would be maintaining these improvements until the specific medication could reverse the underlying metabolic crisis that was threatening his life. Rebecca watched the increased activity in the operating room with a mixture of hope and anxiety, unable to understand the medical details, but recognizing that something significant was happening in her son's treatment. The new doctor's confidence and the surgical team's coordinated response suggested that they had identified the problem and were implementing a solution. But she remained terrified that the intervention might be too late to save Marcus from the complications that had already developed. The arrival of the dantrolene marked a turning point in Marcus's treatment. As Daniel administered the medication according to protocols he had memorized during his training but had never expected to use in such a critical situation, the drug worked by interrupting the metabolic processes that were causing Marcus's dangerous symptoms, and its effects were often dramatic and rapid when used in appropriate cases. Within minutes of administration, Marcus's vital signs began to stabilize in ways that confirmed Daniel's diagnosis and validated the aggressive treatment approach. As Marcus's condition improved, Daniel explained to Dr. Williams and the surgical team the rare nature of the condition they had just treated and the importance of genetic testing to confirm the diagnosis and provide information for future medical care. Malignant hyperthermia was an inherited condition that could affect multiple family members, and Rebecca would need to be informed about the implications for both Marcus's future medical care and the potential risk to other relatives who might carry the same genetic mutation. The successful treatment of Marcus's crisis represented more than just effective emergency medicine. It demonstrated the value of specialized knowledge and experience in recognizing rare conditions that could be overlooked by doctors who had not encountered similar cases. Daniel's background in pediatric surgery, combined with his years of emergency medicine experience, had provided him with the unique combination of skills necessary to diagnose and treat a condition that occurred in less than 1% of surgical patients. Rebecca's relief was overwhelming as she watched her son's vital signs return to normal ranges and saw the tension leave the surgical team's faces. The nightmare that had consumed her entire day was finally ending, but she knew that she owed Marcus's survival to the expertise of a doctor she had never met before this crisis. Her gratitude was mixed with curiosity about the man who had appeared at the most critical moment and provided the knowledge that had saved her son's life. Daniel's interaction with Rebecca after Marcus's stabilization was characterized by the compassionate professionalism he had developed through years of working with families during medical emergencies. He explained the diagnosis in terms that she could understand while emphasizing that Marcus's complete recovery was expected now that the underlying condition had been identified and treated. The boy would need additional monitoring and genetic testing, but the immediate crisis had passed, and Marcus should be able to return to normal activities within a few days. The conversation between Daniel and Rebecca revealed the depth of her gratitude and her desire to understand more about the condition that had nearly claimed her son's life. Her questions demonstrated the analytical mind that had made her successful in business, applied now to understanding the medical factors that would affect Marcus's future health and safety. Daniel's patient explanations helped her process the information while beginning to understand the genetic implications that would require ongoing medical attention. Emma Rodriguez had been staying with Mrs. Peterson, their elderly neighbor, during Daniel's emergency call to the hospital, but she had sensed the seriousness of the situation from her father's hurried departure and tense phone conversations. When Daniel finally returned home in the early hours of the morning, Emma was waiting in the living room with questions about the case that demonstrated her growing understanding of medical emergencies and her concern for the children her father treated. Daniel's description of Marcus's case, adapted for Emma's 9-year-old understanding, became a teaching moment about rare medical conditions and the importance of specialized knowledge in emergency situations. Emma's questions revealed her sophisticated grasp of medical concepts and her genuine empathy for families facing health crises. Her interest in medicine continued to deepen through these conversations with her father, and her compassion for others was evident in her concern for both Marcus and his mother. The following days brought follow-up appointments and additional testing to confirm Marcus's diagnosis and provide Rebecca with comprehensive information about managing his condition. Daniel's continued involvement in Marcus's care created opportunities for him to interact with Rebecca beyond the immediate emergency, and he began to recognize the strength and intelligence that had made her successful in her business career. Their conversations about Marcus's treatment revealed shared values about family priorities and the importance of making difficult decisions based on incomplete information. Rebecca's gratitude toward Daniel extended beyond appreciation for his medical expertise to respect for his compassionate approach to patient care and his ability to communicate complex information clearly. She began to understand that his calm demeanor during the crisis had been based not just on professional training, but on personal experience with medical emergencies and loss that had taught him how to support families during their most difficult moments. The depth of his empathy and the quality of his medical judgment impressed her in ways that went beyond simple professional admiration. Marcus's recovery proceeded exactly as Daniel had predicted, with the boy's energy and enthusiasm returning rapidly once his body had processed the effects of the anesthetic reaction. His questions about his condition demonstrated the same analytical thinking that characterized his mother's approach to problems, and his interest in understanding the medical aspects of his experience showed a maturity that impressed both his doctors and his family. The genetic testing confirmed Daniel's diagnosis and provided important information for Marcus's future medical care. The relationship that developed between the Chen and Rodriguez families grew naturally from their shared experience with Marcus's medical crisis and their children's genuine friendship. Emma and Marcus discovered common interests in science and medicine that created a foundation for ongoing interaction, while Rebecca and Daniel found themselves drawn into conversations that revealed their shared experiences as single parents, navigating the challenges of raising children while maintaining demanding careers. Rebecca's investigation into Daniel's background revealed the prestigious career he had left behind and the personal losses that had shaped his current priorities. Her respect for his medical expertise deepened as she learned about his specialized training and the sacrifices he had made to prioritize Emma's needs over professional advancement. The parallels between their experiences as single parents created a connection that transcended the doctor-patient relationship that had brought them together. Daniel's growing appreciation for Rebecca's character was based on more than gratitude for her trust during Marcus's crisis. Her questions about medical care revealed an intelligent mind that could grasp complex concepts quickly, and her obvious devotion to Marcus reminded him of his own priorities as a parent. The strength she had shown during the most frightening experience of her life, combined with her genuine concern for other families facing similar challenges, impressed him as evidence of character that went beyond professional success. The foundation that was slowly being built between Daniel and Rebecca was strengthened by their children's friendship and their mutual recognition of shared values about family, medicine, and the importance of making sacrifices for the people they loved. Neither was actively seeking romantic involvement, but both began to appreciate qualities in the other that suggested the possibility of connections that went beyond their initial circumstances. The relationship remained focused on their children's well-being and their professional respect for each other's expertise, but the potential for deeper bonds was becoming apparent to both of them. Marcus's return to school and normal activities marked the end of the immediate medical crisis, but it also represented the beginning of ongoing relationships that would continue to develop in unexpected directions. His experience had created lasting connections between families who might otherwise never have met, and the medical emergency that had threatened to destroy Rebecca's world had instead introduced people who would become increasingly important in both families' lives. The intersection of professional expertise and personal compassion that had saved Marcus's life was also creating the foundation for relationships that would enrich the lives of everyone involved. The hospital's administrative offices buzzed with unusual tension 3 weeks after Marcus Chen's near-fatal surgical crisis. Dr. Richard Hartman, the chief medical officer at Chicago Memorial Hospital, sat behind his mahogany desk reviewing a thick file that would challenge everything Daniel Rodriguez thought he understood about his carefully rebuilt life. The manila folder contained complaints, investigations, and legal documents that painted a disturbing picture of Daniel's medical practices during his final months at Johns Hopkins University Hospital. Dr. Hartman had received the information through channels that remained deliberately vague, but the source appeared to have intimate knowledge of Daniel's previous work and access to sealed medical records that should have been confidential. The documents detailed 3 pediatric cases where Daniel's unconventional treatment approaches had resulted in outcomes that deviated significantly from standard medical protocols. While none of the cases had resulted in patient deaths, each had generated internal reviews and raised questions about Daniel's judgment during high-pressure medical emergencies. The most troubling case involved 7-year-old Timothy Walsh, whose parents had brought him to Johns Hopkins Emergency Department after he collapsed during a family vacation in Baltimore. Daniel had been the attending surgeon when Timothy's condition deteriorated rapidly, and the boy had required emergency surgery to address what appeared to be complications from an undiagnosed genetic disorder. Daniel's surgical approach had been aggressive and controversial, utilizing experimental techniques that had not been fully approved for pediatric use at the time. Timothy Walsh had survived the surgery and made a complete recovery, but his parents had filed formal complaints alleging that Daniel had failed to obtain proper consent for the experimental procedures and had exposed their son to unnecessary risks. The hospital's internal investigation had found technical violations of protocol, though they acknowledged that Daniel's quick thinking had likely saved the boy's life. The case had been settled quietly, with the hospital agreeing to additional oversight of Daniel's surgical decisions and mandatory consultation requirements for any future experimental procedures. The second case in Dr. Hartman's file concerned 11-year-old Sarah Mitchell, who had been brought to Johns Hopkins with severe internal injuries following a bicycle accident. Daniel had performed emergency surgery to repair damage to her spleen and liver, but complications during the procedure had required him to make split-second decisions that deviated from established surgical protocols. Sarah had required additional operations and an extended hospital stay, though she had ultimately recovered without permanent complications. Sarah Mitchell's family had initially praised Daniel's surgical skill and credited him with saving their daughter's life, but their attitude had changed dramatically after they consulted with other medical experts, who questioned some of Daniel's intraoperative decisions. The family had filed a malpractice lawsuit alleging that Daniel's aggressive surgical approach had caused unnecessary complications that prolonged Sarah's recovery and created additional medical risks. The case had eventually been dismissed when expert witnesses testified that Daniel's decisions had been medically sound given the circumstances, but the legal proceedings had created significant stress and negative publicity. The third case detailed in the file was perhaps the most damaging to Daniel's reputation, involving 9-year-old Michael Chun, no relation to Marcus despite the shared surname. Michael had been admitted to Johns Hopkins with symptoms that suggested a rare autoimmune condition, and Daniel had been consulted due to his expertise in complex pediatric cases. The boy's condition had worsened despite conventional treatments, and Daniel had recommended an experimental therapy that required approval from multiple hospital committees and regulatory agencies. The experimental treatment had initially shown promising results, but Michael had developed severe complications that had required intensive care support for several weeks. While the boy had eventually recovered, his parents had accused Daniel of using their son as a test subject for unproven therapies without adequately explaining the risks involved. The hospital had conducted an extensive investigation that found Daniel had followed proper protocols for experimental treatments, but the case had generated significant controversy within the medical community and had contributed to increased scrutiny of his clinical decisions. Dr. Hartman closed the file and considered the implications of this information for Chicago Memorial Hospital's reputation and liability. Exposure. Daniel Rodriguez had been an exemplary employee during his 3 years at the hospital, with no complaints or incidents that would suggest any problems with his medical judgment or patient care. His successful treatment of Marcus Chen had actually enhanced his standing within the hospital and had generated positive publicity for the pediatric emergency department. However, the pattern revealed in the Johns Hopkins cases suggested a troubling tendency toward aggressive and unconventional treatment approaches that could expose the hospital to positive and unconventional treatment approaches that could expose the hospital to significant legal and financial risks. Dr. Hartman was particularly concerned about the timing of this information's arrival, which coincided with several high-profile malpractice cases that were creating increased scrutiny of hospital practices throughout the Chicago area. The hospital's board of directors had recently implemented stricter oversight requirements for all clinical staff, and these revelations about Daniel's background would likely trigger mandatory reviews and potential disciplinary actions. Person who had provided the information about Daniel's Johns Hopkins cases had specifically mentioned Marcus Chun's recent treatment, suggesting that Daniel's intervention in that crisis had followed the same pattern of aggressive and potentially risky medical decisions that had caused problems at his previous hospital. While Marcus's outcome had been successful, the anonymous informant argued that Daniel's approach had exposed the boy to unnecessary dangers that could have been avoided through more conservative treatment methods. Dr. Hartman's investigation into the source of these allegations had been frustratingly inconclusive, but several clues suggested that someone with intimate knowledge of both hospitals' operations was deliberately trying to damage Daniel's reputation. The timing and specificity of the information suggested coordinated efforts to undermine Daniel's position at Chicago Memorial, possibly in preparation for some larger action that had not yet been revealed. The sophisticated understanding of medical protocols and legal procedures indicated that the source was likely someone with significant experience in healthcare administration or medical law. The implications for Daniel's future at Chicago Memorial were serious and immediate. Hospital policy required full disclosure of any previous legal or disciplinary actions, and Daniel's failure to report these cases during his hiring process could be grounds for termination, regardless of the ultimate merit of the allegations. Dr. Hartman would need to conduct formal interviews with Daniel to understand his version of events and determine whether the hospital's confidence in his clinical abilities had been misplaced. Rebecca Chun received the phone call about Daniel's background on a Tuesday morning while she was reviewing financial reports in her office overlooking Chicago's downtown district. The caller identified himself as Dr. James Peterson, a colleague from Johns Hopkins who claimed to have worked closely with Daniel during his tenure there. Dr. Peterson's voice carried the authority of medical expertise as he expressed concern about Daniel's treatment of Marcus and suggested that Rebecca should be aware of certain aspects of Daniel's professional history that might be relevant to her son's ongoing medical care. Dr. Peterson's account of Daniel's Johns Hopkins cases was detailed and disturbing, painting a picture of a surgeon whose aggressive treatment approaches had consistently created unnecessary risks for pediatric patients. He described Daniel as brilliant but reckless, someone whose personal tragedies had affected his clinical judgment and led him to take dangerous chances with children's lives. The experimental procedures, the protocol violations, and the legal challenges were presented as evidence of a pattern that should concern any parent whose child might receive Daniel's care. The information struck Rebecca like a physical blow, challenging everything she believed about the man who had saved Marcus's life and whose medical expertise she had come to trust completely. Dr. Peterson's credentials appeared legitimate, and his intimate knowledge of medical procedures and hospital operations suggested that his concerns were based on genuine professional experience rather than personal animosity. The specific details he provided about the Johns Hopkins cases were too precise and technical to be fabricated, and his obvious understanding of pediatric medicine gave weight to his criticisms of Daniel's clinical decisions. Rebecca's initial impulse was to dismiss the allegations as unfounded attacks on a doctor who had proven his competence through Marcus's successful treatment, but Dr. Peterson's calm professionalism and apparent lack of personal motivation made his concerns difficult to ignore. He emphasized that he was contacting her out of concern for Marcus's welfare and suggested that she might want to seek second opinions about any ongoing medical care Daniel might recommend. The implication was clear. Daniel's treatment approaches carried risks that other parents had discovered too late to prevent complications for their children. The days following Dr. Peterson's phone call were filled with sleepless nights and agonizing uncertainty as Rebecca struggled to reconcile the allegations against Daniel with her personal experience of his character and medical competence. She conducted her own investigation into his background, using her business connections and resources to verify the information Dr. Peterson had provided. The legal records were public information, and the medical licensing board files confirmed that Daniel had faced multiple investigations during his final years at Johns Hopkins. Rebecca's research revealed additional details that complicated her understanding of Daniel's professional history. While the legal cases and internal investigations were factual, the outcomes had generally supported Daniel's medical decisions and had acknowledged that his aggressive treatment approaches had often been necessary to save children's lives. The expert witnesses in the malpractice cases had testified that Daniel's surgical techniques were innovative and effective, even when they deviated from conventional protocols. However, the pattern of legal challenges and investigations suggested that Daniel's medical practice had consistently generated controversy and had placed him at odds with hospital administrators and regulatory agencies. Rebecca's business experience had taught her to recognize warning signs that indicated potential problems with vendors and partners, and Daniel's professional history displayed several red flags that would have caused her to avoid business relationships with similar risk profiles. The conflict between Rebecca's personal trust in Daniel and the troubling patterns revealed by his professional history created an internal struggle that affected her ability to concentrate on her business responsibilities. She found herself analyzing every interaction she had had with Daniel, searching for signs that might have indicated the reckless tendencies that Dr. Peterson had described. Marcus's successful treatment could be seen as evidence of Daniel's exceptional skill, or it could represent another example of his willingness to take dangerous risks that had happened to produce positive results. Marcus's continued good health and normal activity levels provided some reassurance that Daniel's treatment had been appropriate and effective, but Rebecca could not shake the concern that she had unknowingly exposed her son to unnecessary dangers. During his medical crisis, the genetic testing had confirmed the diagnosis of malignant hyperthermia, validating Daniel's clinical judgment, but Dr. Peterson had suggested that other doctors might have recognized the condition and implemented safer treatment protocols that would have achieved the same results with less risk. The relationship that had been developing between the Chen and Rodriguez families became strained as Rebecca struggled with her doubts about Daniel's character and professional competence. She began to limit Marcus's interactions with Emma and avoided the casual conversations with Daniel that had previously been sources of comfort and connection. Her changed demeanor was obvious to both Daniel and Emma, who were confused by the sudden cooling of relationships that had seemed to be growing stronger each day. Daniel's attempts to understand Rebecca's withdrawal were frustrated by her reluctance to discuss whatever concerns had caused the change in her attitude toward him and his daughter. Emma was particularly hurt by the sudden distance, as her friendship with Marcus had become one of the most important relationships in her young life. The confusion and disappointment created tension in the Rodriguez household, with Emma asking questions about why Marcus's mother no longer seemed to like them and whether they had done something wrong. The situation reached a crisis point when Rebecca made the decision to transfer Marcus's ongoing medical care to a different physician, citing concerns about continuity of care and the need for specialists who had more experience with genetic conditions like malignant hyperthermia. Her explanation was professionally courteous but emotionally distant, providing no indication of the specific concerns that had motivated her decision. Daniel's efforts to discuss Marcus's medical needs and ensure a smooth transition were met with polite but firm boundaries that made clear Rebecca's desire to minimize their ongoing contact. Emma's reaction to the loss of her friendship with Marcus was heartbreaking for Daniel to witness, particularly since he could not explain the reasons for Rebecca's sudden change in attitude. Emma had formed genuine affection for Marcus and had looked forward to their playdates and shared activities with the enthusiasm that characterized her approach to all relationships. The abrupt end to their friendship felt like another loss in Emma's young life, reminding Daniel of the grief she had experienced when her mother died and making him question whether he had somehow failed to protect her from unnecessary emotional pain. The investigation into Daniel's background intensified as Dr. Hartman conducted formal interviews and requested additional documentation from Johns Hopkins University Hospital. The hospital's legal department became involved as they assessed the potential liability exposure from employing a physician whose previous work had generated multiple legal challenges. While Daniel's performance at Chicago Memorial had been exemplary, the pattern of problems at his previous position created concerns about whether the hospital had conducted adequate due diligence during the hiring process. Daniel's meetings with Dr. Hartman were professional but tense, as he was required to provide detailed explanations for clinical decisions he had made years earlier under circumstances that were difficult to recreate or fully communicate. The Johns Hopkins cases had involved complex medical situations where split-second decisions had determined whether children lived or died, but the administrative review process reduced these life-or-death moments to questions about protocol, compliance, and risk management procedures. The hospital's investigation revealed that Daniel had indeed failed to fully disclose the extent of the legal challenges he had faced at Johns Hopkins, though his personnel file contained references to the cases that should have triggered more thorough review during the hiring process. The legal department determined that while Daniel's omissions might provide grounds for disciplinary action, the hospital's own screening procedures had been inadequate and had contributed to the current situation. The stress of defending his professional reputation while trying to understand Rebecca's concerns began to affect Daniel's performance at work and his relationship with Emma at home. The confidence and calm demeanor that had characterized his approach to medical emergencies was replaced by anxiety and self-doubt that made him question clinical decisions that would previously have seemed straightforward. Emma noticed the change in her father's mood and behavior, adding to her confusion about the problems that seemed to have suddenly disrupted their stable and happy life. The revelation of Daniel's professional controversies had been timed to coincide with several other events that would soon reshape the relationships between all the people whose lives had intersected through Marcus's medical crisis. The anonymous source who had provided information about Daniel's background had additional plans that would test the bonds of trust and affection that had developed between the families, while revealing motivations that went far beyond concerns about medical ethics or patient safety. Rebecca's investigation into the source of the allegations against Daniel had begun to raise questions about Dr. Peterson's identity and motivations that suggested the situation was more complex than a simple case of professional concern. Timing of his contact and his intimate knowledge of both Daniel's background and Marcus's recent medical care indicated that someone was deliberately orchestrating events to damage Daniel's reputation and destroy the relationships that had formed between their families. The crisis that had brought Daniel and Rebecca together was about to test whether the trust and respect they had developed could survive the revelation of past controversies and the systematic attack on Daniel's character that someone had carefully planned and executed. The next phase of their relationship would determine whether they could find their way back to the connection that had seemed so natural and promising, or whether the doubts and fears that had been deliberately cultivated would permanently destroy the foundation they had begun to build together. The stakes were higher than just personal relationships, as Daniel's career and Emma's emotional well-being hung in the balance, while Rebecca faced the challenge of distinguishing between legitimate concerns and manipulative attacks designed to exploit her fears as a protective mother. The intersection of personal and professional relationships that had begun with Marcus's medical emergency was about to become even more complicated, as hidden agendas and long-buried secrets emerged to threaten everyone involved. The revelation came on a rainy Thursday evening when Rebecca Chun discovered that Dr. James Peterson, the man who had called to warn her about Daniel Rodriguez's background, did not exist in any medical directory or professional registry she could access. Her private investigator, Thomas Brennan, had spent 2 weeks attempting to verify Peterson's credentials and had found no trace of any physician by that name who had worked at Johns Hopkins University Hospital during the time frame he had claimed. Brennan's investigation had revealed something far more disturbing than a simple case of mistaken identity or professional jealousy. The phone number Peterson had used was registered to a telecommunications company that specialized in providing anonymous calling services for clients who required untraceable communication methods. The sophisticated knowledge of medical procedures and hospital operations that had made Peterson's concerns seem credible had likely been obtained through illegal access to confidential medical records and personnel files. The discovery that she had been deliberately deceived filled Rebecca with a combination of rage and shame that challenged her confidence in her own judgment. As someone who had built a successful business empire through her ability to evaluate people and situations accurately, being manipulated so completely felt like a personal and professional failure that undermined her sense of competence. The realization that she had damaged relationships with people who had genuinely cared about her family based on fabricated evidence created a guilt that was almost unbearable. Rebecca's investigation into the source of the deception had led her to examine financial records and business transactions that revealed a pattern of corporate espionage targeting Chen Industries over the previous 6 months. Someone with significant resources and sophisticated knowledge of her company's operations had been systematically gathering information about her personal life, her business relationships, and her family circumstances in preparation for what appeared to be a coordinated attack on both her professional and private interests. The trail of evidence pointed toward Marcus Hamilton, the former chief financial officer at Chen Industries, whom Rebecca had terminated 18 months earlier, after discovering that he had been embezzling funds through a complex scheme involving offshore accounts and fraudulent vendor relationships. Hamilton had been prosecuted and convicted of financial crimes that had resulted in a prison sentence, but his release 6 months ago had coincided with the beginning of the suspicious activities targeting Rebecca's company and family. Hamilton's access to confidential company information during his employment had included detailed knowledge of Rebecca's personal finances, family relationships, and private medical information that was maintained in the company's executive health insurance records. His intimate understanding of corporate operations and his connections within Chicago's business community would have provided him with the resources and knowledge necessary to orchestrate the sophisticated deception that had nearly destroyed her relationship with Daniel Rodriguez. The motive for Hamilton's elaborate revenge scheme became clear as Rebecca's security team uncovered evidence of his attempts to manipulate Chen Industries' stock price through strategic leaks of confidential information and coordinated attacks on the company's reputation. His plan had been to create personal and professional chaos that would distract Rebecca from business operations while simultaneously damaging investor confidence and creating opportunities for hostile takeover attempts by competitors who had secretly funded his activities. The attack on Daniel's reputation had been designed to isolate Rebecca emotionally while creating additional stress that would affect her ability to focus on protecting her company from the financial manipulations Hamilton had orchestrated. By exploiting her protective instincts as a mother and her guilt over Marcus's medical crisis, Hamilton had hoped to create psychological vulnerability that would make her more susceptible to the business pressures he was simultaneously applying through other channels. Rebecca's discovery of Hamilton's involvement in the deception prompted an immediate investigation by federal authorities who specialized in cases involving corporate fraud and industrial espionage. The evidence of illegal access to medical records, telecommunications fraud, and coordinated market manipulation provided grounds for additional criminal charges that would likely extend Hamilton's prison sentence significantly. The investigation also revealed the involvement of several other individuals and companies that had participated in the scheme, including competitors who had paid Hamilton for confidential information about Chen Industries' business strategies. The realization that she had been systematically deceived and manipulated created an urgent need for Rebecca to repair the damage she had caused to her relationship with Daniel and to restore the trust that had been destroyed through no fault of his own. However, the complexity of the deception and the time that had elapsed since she had withdrawn from their relationship made the prospect of reconciliation both emotionally challenging and practically complicated. Daniel's professional situation had deteriorated significantly during the weeks following Rebecca's withdrawal from their relationship and her decision to transfer Marcus's medical care to another physician. The hospital's investigation into his background had expanded beyond the original allegations to include a comprehensive review of his clinical decisions and patient outcomes during his entire tenure at Chicago Memorial Hospital. While the investigation had found no evidence of inappropriate medical care or protocol violations, the process had created a cloud of suspicion that affected his relationships with colleagues and his confidence in his own clinical abilities. Dr. Hartman's meetings with Daniel had become increasingly formal and adversarial as the hospital's legal department pressured for documentation and explanations that went far beyond normal administrative procedures. The requirement that Daniel obtain supervisory approval for any treatment decisions that deviated from standard protocols had effectively undermined his ability to respond quickly and decisively to medical emergencies, skills that had made him particularly valuable in the pediatric emergency department. Emma Rodriguez had struggled to understand the sudden changes in her father's mood and behavior that had accompanied the professional challenges he was facing at the hospital. Her friendship with Marcus Chen had ended abruptly without explanation, and her father's previously cheerful demeanor had been replaced by distraction and anxiety that made her feel insecure about their relationship and their future together in Chicago. The stress of defending his professional reputation while trying to maintain his responsibilities as a single parent had begun to affect Daniel's health and his ability to provide Emma with the emotional stability she needed. His sleep patterns had become irregular, his appetite had decreased, and his patience with normal childhood behaviors had shortened in ways that reminded Emma of the difficult period following her mother's death, when grief had made her father emotionally unavailable for extended periods. Daniel's consideration of leaving Chicago Memorial Hospital and potentially relocating to another city had been motivated by his desire to protect Emma from the ongoing stress and uncertainty that surrounded his professional situation. However, the prospect of disrupting Emma's education and social relationships for the second time in her young life created additional guilt and anxiety that complicated his decision-making process. The investigation into Daniel's background had attracted the attention of other hospitals and medical institutions that were considering him for positions that would allow him to escape the controversy that had developed at Chicago Memorial. However, the publicity surrounding the allegations had created concerns about potential liability issues that made many employers reluctant to hire him despite his obvious clinical competence and positive patient outcomes. Emma's performance in school had begun to decline as she struggled to concentrate on academic tasks while worrying about her father's problems and the possibility that they might have to move away from the city where she had finally begun to feel settled and secure. Her teachers had noticed changes in her behavior and academic engagement that suggested she was experiencing significant emotional stress, though Emma had been reluctant to discuss the specific concerns that were affecting her well-being. The friendship that had developed between Emma and Marcus Chen had represented one of the most positive relationships in Emma's life since her mother's death, and losing that connection had created a sense of abandonment and rejection that was particularly painful for a child who had already experienced significant loss. Her inability to understand why Marcus's mother no longer wanted them to be friends had led to self-doubt and anxiety about her own worthiness as a friend and daughter. Rebecca's investigation into the deception that had manipulated her perceptions of Daniel had revealed the extent to which her withdrawal from their relationship had caused genuine harm to both Daniel and Emma Rodriguez. The evidence of Hamilton's elaborate revenge scheme had made clear that Daniel's reputation and professional standing had been deliberately targeted as part of the larger plan to destabilize her personal life and business operations. The process of documenting Hamilton's crimes had required Rebecca to examine the specific ways in which his deception had exploited her fears and protective instincts as a mother. The sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation that Hamilton had demonstrated suggested that his revenge scheme had been planned and researched with the same attention to detail that had characterized his financial crimes at Chen Industries. Rebecca's business experience had taught her to recognize and respond to competitive threats and market manipulations, but the personal nature of Hamilton's attack had caught her completely unprepared for the emotional and psychological dimensions of corporate espionage. The realization that her private life and family relationships had been treated as weapons in a business conflict created a sense of violation that went beyond the financial losses her company had experienced. The evidence that Hamilton had accessed confidential medical information about Marcus's treatment and had used that knowledge to create credible-seeming concerns about Daniel's medical practices revealed the depth of his criminal behavior and his willingness to exploit a child's medical crisis for personal gain. The violation of medical privacy laws and the exploitation of a family's vulnerability during a health emergency represented particularly heinous aspects of Hamilton's revenge scheme that would likely result in severe legal consequences. Rebecca's decision to contact Daniel and attempt to explain the deception that had caused her to withdraw from their relationship required her to overcome pride, embarrassment, and uncertainty about whether the damage to their trust could ever be repaired. The phone call she made to Daniel's home on a Saturday morning was one of the most difficult conversations she had ever initiated, requiring her to acknowledge that she had been manipulated and had made decisions that had harmed people who had genuinely cared about her family. Daniel's initial response to Rebecca's call was characterized by professional courtesy rather than personal warmth, reflecting the hurt and confusion that her withdrawal had caused during the previous weeks. His willingness to listen to her explanation of Hamilton's deception was motivated more by his desire to understand what had happened than by any immediate desire to rebuild their relationship, though her obvious distress and genuine remorse began to soften his defensive posture as the conversation progressed. The revelation that Rebecca had been systematically deceived through a sophisticated corporate espionage scheme helped Daniel understand that her withdrawal from their relationship had been based on fabricated evidence rather than genuine concerns about his character or medical competence. However, the damage to their trust and the professional consequences he had experienced as a result of the false allegations created barriers to reconciliation that would require time and effort to overcome. Emma's reaction to learning that Marcus's mother had been tricked into believing false information about her father was a mixture of relief that they had not done anything wrong and continued hurt over the friendship that had been unnecessarily lost. Her questions about whether the deception meant that she and Marcus could resume their friendship revealed her hope that the relationships that had meant so much to her might still be salvageable despite the weeks of separation and confusion. The meeting that Rebecca requested with Daniel and Emma to personally apologize for the harm her actions had caused was emotionally charged and difficult for all participants. Rebecca's acknowledgement of the pain she had inflicted and her explanation of how she had been manipulated created an opportunity for healing, but the complexity of the emotions involved made the conversation challenging and sometimes awkward. Marcus Chun's excitement about the possibility of resuming his friendship with Emma Rodriguez was tempered by his confusion about why the friendship had ended in the first place, and his concern about whether similar problems might occur in the future. His questions about the adult conflicts that had affected their relationship revealed a maturity and perceptiveness that impressed both families, while highlighting the impact that adult decisions could have on children's emotional well-being. The legal proceedings against Marcus Hamilton and his co-conspirators provided a framework for addressing the crimes that had been committed, but the personal healing required by the relationships that had been damaged would take much longer to accomplish. Rebecca's public acknowledgement of the deception and her support for Daniel's professional reputation helped restore his standing at Chicago Memorial Hospital, but the emotional trust that had been broken would require ongoing effort and commitment to rebuild. Daniel's decision to remain at Chicago Memorial Hospital rather than seeking employment elsewhere was influenced by Rebecca's efforts to repair the damage her actions had caused and by Emma's strong desire to maintain the friendships and stability she had found in Chicago. The professional challenges he had faced during the investigation had ultimately strengthened his position at the hospital by demonstrating his integrity and clinical competence under pressure, though the experience had been emotionally costly. For both him and Emma, the restoration of the friendship between Emma and Marcus became a symbol of healing and resilience that provided hope for the adults who were working to rebuild their own relationships after the deception and manipulation they had experienced. The children's ability to forgive and move forward provided an example that helped their parents navigate the more complex emotions and practical considerations involved in adult reconciliation. Rebecca's establishment of new security protocols and privacy protections for her family and business operations represented her commitment to preventing future attacks while acknowledging that the vulnerability Hamilton had exploited was an inherent risk of public success and corporate leadership. The experience had taught her valuable lessons about the intersection of personal and professional security that would inform her business practices and personal decisions going forward. The foundation for renewed relationships had been established through honest communication and mutual acknowledgement of the harm that had been caused by the deception, but the process of rebuilding trust and intimacy would require ongoing effort and patience from everyone involved. The shared experience of overcoming deliberate manipulation had created bonds of understanding and mutual support that would serve as the foundation for stronger relationships in the future, though the path forward would not be without challenges and setbacks along the way. 6 months after Marcus Hamilton's arrest, the golden autumn light streaming through the windows of Rebecca Chun's office illuminated architectural plans spread across her conference table. The documents detailed the construction of the Rodriguez-Chen Pediatric Emergency Medicine Center, a state-of-the-art facility that would serve as the cornerstone of a new medical campus dedicated to treating rare pediatric conditions and training emergency medicine specialists. The project had evolved from Rebecca's desire to create something meaningful from the trauma her family had experienced, transforming the nightmare of Marcus's medical crisis into an opportunity to help other families facing similar emergencies. The center would combine cutting-edge medical technology with innovative treatment protocols, developed specifically for children with rare genetic conditions and complex medical needs that required specialized expertise. Daniel Rodriguez stood beside Rebecca as they reviewed the final blueprints, his input as the facility's future medical director having shaped every aspect of the center's design and operational planning. The collaboration between them had grown naturally from their shared commitment to improving pediatric emergency care, but it had also deepened their personal relationship in ways that neither had anticipated when they first began working together. On the project, the medical center would feature specialized operating rooms equipped with advanced monitoring systems, designed specifically for detecting and treating conditions like malignant hyperthermia, ensuring that future patients would receive immediate and appropriate care without the delays and confusion that had nearly cost Marcus's life. The facility would also include research laboratories where Teams of specialists could study rare pediatric conditions and develop new treatment protocols that could be shared with hospitals throughout the country. Emma Rodriguez and Marcus Chun had become unofficial consultants on the center's design, offering perspectives on how the facility could be made more welcoming and less frightening for young patients and their families. Their suggestions had led to the inclusion of family-friendly waiting areas, interactive educational displays, and recreational spaces where children could maintain normal activities during extended treatment periods. The friendship between Emma and Marcus had grown stronger through their shared involvement in planning the medical center, with both children developing a sophisticated understanding of healthcare delivery and medical research that impressed the adult professionals working on the project. Emma's interest in medicine had evolved into serious consideration of a career in pediatric healthcare, while Marcus had begun exploring the business aspects of medical facility management and healthcare administration. Rebecca's role as the project's primary financial supporter had required her to navigate complex regulatory requirements and coordinate with multiple government agencies responsible for healthcare facility licensing and medical research oversight. The process had been more challenging than any business venture she had previously undertaken, but the potential impact on pediatric healthcare had made the obstacles worthwhile and had given her a sense of purpose that went beyond traditional corporate success. The center's staff recruitment had attracted some of the most talented pediatric emergency medicine specialists in the country, drawn by the opportunity to work in a facility specifically designed to support innovative treatment approaches and research into rare medical conditions. Daniel's reputation within the medical community had been instrumental in attracting high-caliber professionals who might otherwise have been reluctant to relocate to Chicago for traditional hospital positions. Dr. Patricia Williams had accepted the position of Chief of Pediatric Surgery at the new center, bringing with her years of experience and a commitment to developing surgical protocols that could reduce the risks associated with complex pediatric procedures. Her decision to join the center had been influenced by her admiration for Daniel's diagnostic abilities and her desire to work in an environment that prioritized patient outcomes over administrative convenience. The center's research division would be headed by Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a geneticist whose groundbreaking work on inherited metabolic disorders had earned her international recognition and research funding from major medical foundations. Her collaboration with Daniel on studies of malignant hyperthermia and related genetic conditions promised to advance understanding of these rare but potentially fatal disorders while developing improved screening and treatment methods. The facility's emergency department had been designed with input from paramedics, emergency medical technicians, and other first responders, whose recommendations had shaped the traffic flow patterns and equipment placement that would enable rapid patient assessment and treatment initiation. The goal was to create seamless coordination between pre-hospital care and definitive treatment that could improve outcomes for critically ill children transported from throughout the region. Rebecca's business expertise had proven invaluable in developing operational procedures and financial management systems that would ensure the center's long-term sustainability while maintaining its commitment to treating patients regardless of their family's ability to pay. The facility would operate as a nonprofit organization supported by Chen Industries Charitable Foundation and grants from medical research organizations, with surplus revenues reinvested in equipment upgrades and staff development programs. The construction timeline had been accelerated through Rebecca's use of premium contractors and round-the-clock work schedules that reflected her urgency to begin operations as quickly as possible. The project had created hundreds of temporary construction jobs and would eventually provide permanent employment for more than 200 medical professionals, support staff, and administrative personnel, making it a significant economic development initiative for the surrounding community. Daniel's transition from his position at Chicago Memorial hospital to the new center had been carefully planned to ensure continuity of patient care while allowing him to focus on developing the innovative treatment protocols that would distinguish the facility from traditional emergency departments. His experience with rare pediatric conditions and his understanding of the emotional needs of families during medical crises had shaped the center's approach to patient care and staff training. The center's educational mission would include training programs for emergency medicine residents and continuing education courses for practicing physicians who wanted to improve their ability to recognize and treat rare pediatric conditions. Daniel's role as Director of Medical Education would allow him to share his expertise with a new generation of doctors while contributing to the advancement of pediatric emergency medicine as a specialty field. Emma's involvement in the center's planning had strengthened her relationship with both Rebecca and Marcus while providing her with exposure to healthcare careers that had solidified her determination to pursue medical education. Her questions about patient care, medical research, and healthcare administration had demonstrated intellectual curiosity and analytical abilities that impressed the adult professionals working on the project. Marcus's recovery from his surgical crisis had been complete, with no lasting effects from his experience with malignant hyperthermia. But the genetic testing had revealed information that would be important for his future medical care and family planning. The center's genetic counseling services would help families like the Chens understand inherited conditions and make informed decisions about medical care and family planning based on accurate scientific information. The media attention surrounding the center's development had generated positive publicity for both Chen Industries and Daniel's medical practice, helping to restore his professional reputation after the challenges he had faced during Hamilton's revenge campaign. The project had been featured in medical journals and business publications as an example of successful collaboration between corporate philanthropy and healthcare innovation. The facility's grand opening was scheduled for the following spring, with ceremonies that would include presentations by leading pediatric emergency medicine specialists and tours of the specialized treatment areas and research laboratories. The event would serve as both a celebration of the center's completion and an educational opportunity for healthcare professionals interested in learning about the facility's innovative approaches to pediatric emergency care. Rebecca's relationship with Daniel had evolved beyond their professional collaboration on the medical center project, though both had been cautious about allowing their personal feelings to develop too quickly after the trust issues they had experienced during Hamilton's deception campaign. Their shared commitment to the center's mission had created numerous opportunities for private conversations and collaborative decision-making that had gradually rebuilt the intimacy that had been developing before Hamilton's interference. The legal proceedings against Hamilton and his co-conspirators had concluded with significant prison sentences and financial restitution orders that had provided some sense of justice for the harm they had caused. However, the experience had taught Rebecca valuable lessons about personal security and the importance of verifying information before making important decisions based on unconfirmed allegations. Daniel's confidence in his clinical abilities had been fully restored through his work on the medical center project and his continued success in treating pediatric emergencies at Chicago Memorial Hospital. The experience of being falsely accused had actually strengthened his commitment to maintaining the highest standards of patient care while developing innovative treatment approaches that could benefit children with rare and complex medical conditions. Emma's academic performance had returned to its previous high levels as the stability in her family situation had been restored, and her excitement about the medical center project had provided new motivation for her studies. Her teachers had noted improvements in her confidence and leadership abilities that seemed to reflect her involvement in the adult world of medical planning and healthcare innovation. Marcus's enthusiasm for the medical center project had sparked his interest in the business aspects of healthcare delivery, leading him to ask sophisticated questions about facility management, staff coordination, and financial planning that demonstrated analytical thinking abilities similar to those that had made his mother successful in corporate leadership. Rebecca had begun including him in age-appropriate discussions about business strategy and decision-making that were preparing him for potential future involvement in Chen Industries or other business ventures. The friendship between Emma and Marcus had deepened through their shared involvement in the medical center project, creating a bond that went beyond typical childhood friendships to include mutual support for each other's academic and personal development. Their collaboration on presentations about the center for their respective schools had demonstrated communication skills and teamwork abilities that impressed both their teachers and parents. The center's impact on the surrounding community had extended beyond healthcare delivery to include partnerships with local schools for science, education programs, and internship opportunities for high school students interested in medical careers. The facility's commitment to community engagement had been influenced by Rebecca's understanding of corporate social responsibility and Daniel's belief in the importance of inspiring young people to pursue careers in healthcare. The research initiatives planned for the center had attracted funding from national medical research foundations and pharmaceutical companies interested in supporting studies of rare pediatric conditions. The facility's combination of clinical care and research activities would position it as a leader in pediatric emergency medicine while contributing to the advancement of medical knowledge that could benefit children throughout the world. Rebecca's experience with the Medical Center project had confirmed her decision to expand Chen Industries' involvement in healthcare-related ventures, including investments in medical technology companies and partnerships with research institutions working on innovative treatment approaches. The success of the center had demonstrated that her business skills could be effectively applied to healthcare initiatives that created both social benefits and sustainable financial returns. Daniel's role as medical director of the center represented the culmination of his career transition from prestigious academic surgery to community-focused emergency medicine, proving that meaningful professional satisfaction could be achieved through service to others rather than pursuit of personal recognition. The opportunity to shape a new healthcare facility according to his vision for optimal patient care had provided him with professional fulfillment that surpassed anything he had experienced during his previous career. The center's opening would mark not only the beginning of a new chapter in pediatric emergency medicine, but also the transformation of the relationships between the families whose lives had been forever changed by Marcus's medical crisis and the deception that had followed. The facility would stand as a permanent reminder of their ability to overcome adversity through cooperation, trust, and shared commitment to helping others who faced similar challenges. The legacy of Marcus's medical emergency had evolved from a terrifying crisis into an opportunity for positive change that would benefit countless families for generations to come, demonstrating that even the most difficult experiences could be transformed into sources of hope and healing through determination, collaboration, and the courage to trust in the fundamental goodness of people who shared common values and commitments. 3 years had passed since the ribbon-cutting ceremony at the Rodriguez Chen Pediatric Emergency Medicine Center, and the facility had already saved the lives of over 200 children who might otherwise have died from undiagnosed rare conditions or inadequate emergency care. The center's success had exceeded everyone's expectations, earning recognition from medical associations worldwide and establishing Chicago as a leading destination for families seeking specialized pediatric emergency treatment. Emma Rodriguez, now 15 years old, stood confidently at the podium in the center's main auditorium, addressing a gathering of medical professionals who had come to learn about the facility's innovative approaches to pediatric emergency care. Her presentation on the patient perspective, how medical facilities can better serve young patients and their families, demonstrated the poise and intelligence that had made her a sought-after speaker at healthcare conferences throughout the region. Marcus Chen, also 15, sat in the front row with a laptop computer, live streaming Emma's presentation to medical students at universities across the country who were studying healthcare administration and patient advocacy. His technical expertise and business acumen had made him an invaluable partner in Emma's speaking engagements, and their collaborative approach to healthcare education had inspired other young people to consider careers in medical fields. Dr. Daniel Rodriguez watched his daughter's presentation with pride that went far beyond typical parental satisfaction. Emma's articulate discussion of patient needs and healthcare delivery reflected not only her intelligence and communication skills, but also her deep understanding of medicine and genuine compassion for others that reminded him of her mother's caring nature. The confidence she displayed while addressing accomplished professionals was evidence of the remarkable young woman she had become. Rebecca Chen observed Marcus's smooth coordination of the technical aspects of the presentation, with the same admiration she felt for his academic achievements and leadership qualities at his private high school. His ability to balance advanced coursework with meaningful volunteer work at the medical center demonstrated the work ethic and social consciousness that she had hoped to instill in him through her own example of combining business success with community service. The relationship between Rebecca and Daniel had evolved naturally over the years, progressing from professional collaboration to deep friendship to romantic partnership without the dramatic declarations or sudden changes that might have created complications for their children or their professional responsibilities. Their wedding the previous summer had been celebrated at the medical center, surrounded by colleagues, patients' families, and community members whose lives had been touched by the facility's mission. Emma's adjustment to having Rebecca as her stepmother had been remarkably smooth, facilitated by the genuine affection that had developed between them through their shared involvement in the medical center's activities and Rebecca's respect for Emma's independence and mature judgment. Rebecca's business expertise had proven valuable in helping Emma develop leadership skills and confidence in public speaking, while Emma's medical interests had given Rebecca new perspectives on healthcare policy and patient advocacy. Marcus's acceptance of Daniel as his stepfather had been equally positive, strengthened by their shared interests in science and medicine and Daniel's patient guidance in helping Marcus understand complex medical concepts. Daniel's experience as a single parent had prepared him to respect Marcus's close relationship with his mother while offering support and friendship that enriched rather than competing with that primary bond. The blended family had created traditions and routines that honored both families' histories, while establishing new customs that reflected their unique circumstances and shared values. Sunday morning breakfast had become a time for discussing everyone's upcoming week and sharing news about the medical center's patients and research projects, conversations that often evolved into animated debates about healthcare policy or scientific discoveries that kept everyone engaged and intellectually stimulated. The center's research division had published groundbreaking studies on genetic screening for malignant hyperthermia and related conditions, work that had led to improved safety protocols at hospitals throughout North America and Europe. The early detection methods developed at the center had prevented dozens of potentially fatal reactions to anesthesia, validating the facility's mission and demonstrating the value of specialized research in rare pediatric conditions. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's team had identified genetic markers that could predict susceptibility to malignant hyperthermia with greater accuracy than previous testing methods, allowing families to make informed decisions about surgical procedures and anesthetic protocols. The research had also revealed connections between malignant hyperthermia and other genetic conditions, leading to comprehensive screening programs that could identify multiple inherited disorders through single genetic tests. The center's educational programs had trained over 500 emergency medicine physicians, nurses, and paramedics in recognizing and treating rare pediatric conditions, dramatically improving survival rates for children with complex medical emergencies throughout the region. The facility's simulation laboratories allowed medical professionals to practice treating rare conditions in realistic scenarios without risking patient safety, providing valuable experience that could prove critical during actual emergencies. Emma's volunteer work at the center had evolved from simple patient interaction to sophisticated research assistance that had contributed to several published studies on pediatric emergency medicine. Her ability to communicate with young patients and their families had provided researchers with insights into the psychological aspects of medical treatment that had informed improvements in patient care protocols and facility design. Marcus's internship with the center's administration had given him practical experience in healthcare management while contributing to operational improvements that had increased efficiency and patient satisfaction. His analysis of patient flow patterns and treatment timing had led to procedural changes that reduced waiting times and improved coordination between different medical specialties. The center's impact on the surrounding community had extended far beyond direct medical care to include educational partnerships with local schools, scholarship programs for students interested in healthcare careers, and community health initiatives that addressed preventive care and health education. The facility's commitment to serving families regardless of their financial circumstances had made it a trusted resource for the entire region. Rebecca's expansion of Chen Industries' healthcare investments had created a portfolio of medical technology companies and research initiatives that complemented the center's mission while generating sustainable returns for the company's shareholders. The success of these ventures had demonstrated that socially responsible investing could achieve both financial success and positive social impact, inspiring other corporations to consider similar approaches to business development. Daniel's role as the center's medical director had allowed him to influence emergency medicine practices throughout the healthcare industry while maintaining direct patient care responsibilities that kept him connected to the human dimension of medical treatment. His publications on rare pediatric conditions and emergency treatment protocols had established him as a leading authority in his field while providing practical guidance for other medical professionals. The center's international recognition had attracted visiting scholars and medical professionals from around the world who came to study its innovative approaches to pediatric emergency care and research. The facility's influence on global pediatric medicine had spread through these professional exchanges and collaborative research projects that addressed rare medical conditions affecting children in diverse geographic and economic circumstances. Emma's acceptance into Harvard University's pre-medical program represented the culmination of years of academic excellence and meaningful extracurricular activities that had prepared her for the challenges of medical education. Her essay about her experiences at the medical center had impressed admissions officers and had earned her scholarship support that would allow her to focus on her studies without financial concerns. Marcus's admission to the Wharton School's undergraduate business program reflected his demonstrated abilities in healthcare administration and his commitment to using business skills for social benefit. His plans to study healthcare management and medical economics would prepare him for leadership roles in healthcare organizations or medical research institutions where he could continue contributing to improvements in patient care. The medical center's expansion plans included satellite facilities in underserved communities and partnerships with rural hospitals that would extend specialized pediatric emergency care to areas where such services were previously unavailable. The growth strategy reflected the facility's commitment to serving all children, regardless of geographic location or economic circumstances, ensuring that the benefits of specialized medical care could reach families throughout the region. The annual Marcus Hamilton Memorial Lecture Series, named ironically after the man whose criminal activities had inadvertently led to the center's creation, featured presentations by leading medical researchers and ethicists who discussed advances in pediatric medicine and the importance of integrity in healthcare. The lecture served as reminders that positive outcomes could emerge from negative experiences when people chose to respond with determination and commitment to helping others. The success of the Rodriguez-Chun Pediatric Emergency Medicine Center had demonstrated that individual experiences, no matter how frightening or challenging, could be transformed into lasting benefits for entire communities through vision, collaboration, and sustained effort. The facility stood as proof that medical crises could become catalysts for positive change that extended far beyond the original participants to touch the lives of countless families for generations to come. As Emma concluded her presentation, to enthusiastic applause from the medical professionals in the audience, she looked toward her parents in the back of the auditorium and smiled with the confidence of a young woman who understood that her own experiences had contributed to something meaningful and lasting. The journey that had begun with her friendship with Marcus during his medical crisis had evolved into a commitment to helping other families navigate similar challenges with better resources and support than had been available to them. Marcus's technical coordination of the presentation's conclusion demonstrated the same attention to detail and commitment to excellence that characterized everything he undertook, whether academic projects or volunteer work at the medical center. His partnership with Emma in healthcare education reflected the collaborative spirit that had sustained their friendship through years of growth and change, while inspiring other young people to consider careers dedicated to serving others. The story that had begun with a medical emergency in an operating room had become a legacy of hope, healing, and positive change that would continue influencing pediatric healthcare for decades to come, proving that sometimes the most frightening moments in life could become the foundation for the most meaningful achievements. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.